this is your first time to the channel, welcome. My name is Scott. I am a practicing physician assistant working in endocrinology. I'm also a type 1 diabetic, as you can tell from my shirt here. So if you're not subscribed to the channel, you're interested in diabetes-related news, tech talk, product reviews, please go ahead and subscribe. I'm going to be coming out with new content all of the time. So as someone who's had type 1 diabetes for over 30 years, I know the diet for diabetics can sometimes get a little boring. So what I wanted to talk about today is 5 of my favorite diabetic-friendly alternatives for 5 popular foods. So and I'm talking about the good stuff too, talking about your chips, your fries, your pizza, all of that stuff. I wanted to talk about some alternatives, some different ways you can make these popular foods a little bit more diabetic friendly. So let's start with breakfast and talk about potentially one of the worst breakfasts you can have, and that's actually oatmeal. So oatmeal can be very deceiving, as most people think this is a very healthy breakfast food, but for diabetics, it can spike your sugar extremely high, extremely fast. But if you make some small adjustments, you can actually make this breakfast a lot more diabetic friendly. So let's talk about how you can do that. So there's different types of oatmeals. The ones you get in those little packets that a lot of people eat, that's what's known as instant oatmeal. Instant oatmeal is oatmeal that's been stripped of all of its nutritious properties, and it's really just terrible for diabetics. They're highly processed, high glycemic index, normally very little fiber, and normally they have a lot of sugar added to them as well. FYI, the higher something is in glycemic index, the faster it's going to spike your sugar. Diabetic-friendly foods are low GI score foods. And instant oatmeal actually has a GI score of 83, so that's very high. So as a diabetic, if you want to have oatmeal, what should you do? You have what's known as steel-cut oatmeal. So steel-cut oatmeal is the least processed form of oatmeal, and it has a very low glycemic index of only 53. Compare that to the GI score we talked about of instant oatmeal of 83, so much lower GI score. It's going to cause a much lower spike in your blood glucose. And if you want to improve upon this even further, I would suggest adding additional fiber to the oatmeal. This can be in the form of chia seeds or flax seeds. Adding any fiber to any food really slows its digestion and decreases the spike it can cause in your blood sugar. So for oatmeal for diabetics, stick to your steel-cut oatmeal, add a little bit of fiber in the form of chia seeds or flax seeds. Next thing I wanted to talk about is fruit. So fruit is something that a lot of diabetics feel that they just can't eat, that it's just something that as a diabetic, there's no way to get around having this without your blood sugar going extremely high. And that's really not true. So fruit is definitely a good option if you're picking the right types and of course having it in moderation. Going back to glycemic index again, some fruits are very high in glycemic index and are going to spike your blood sugars through the roof. Others are much lower and going to have a much more minimal impact on your blood sugars. So what are some of the high GI fruits that you should be having very rarely? That's going to be pineapples, which have a GI score of 66, raisins that have a GI score of 64, and watermelon that has a GI score of 72, just to name a few. Now, the fruits that are low in GI score, the ones that are going to have a very minimal impact on your blood sugar, are all of your berries. Blackberries have a GI score of 25, strawberries a GI score of 41, and blueberries have a GI score of 53. Comparing that to the previous ones I just went over, the pineapple, the watermelon, and the raisins, you can see a big difference in the GI score. These are much lower. A couple other low glycemic fruits that I like to have that have a much more minimal impact on your blood sugar are apples with a GI score of 36 and grapefruit that only has a GI score of 26. So berries, apples, grapefruit, all great types of fruits for diabetics that have a very low GI score and will have a much more minimal impact on your blood sugar compared to some of the other high GI score ones that I went over. So let's talk about the infamous pizza next. This is one of the foods that diabetic patients know so well. It's one of those unpredictable foods that just spike your blood sugar incredibly high and just causes a lot of different problems. I used to avoid pizza, and when I'd have it, I'd have very little because I knew it was just such a unpredictable food and it just caused such problems with my blood sugars. That was until cauliflower pizza came out. So cauliflower pizza is pizza dough that's made with cauliflower, obviously. And when it's made the right way, it tastes very much like regular dough. And the great part is it's generally a quarter of the carbs that regular dough has in pizza. You have to be really careful though with the company that you're buying it from, because some companies have a bunch of additives in addition to the cauliflower, things like rice flour, almond flour, tapioca, all of these different ingredients they throw in there that make it taste a little bit better, but that make the carb amount much higher and make your blood sugar spike a lot higher. So you have to be really careful picking the right company that makes this cauliflower dough. My favorite cauliflower crust is actually by a company called Cauliflower Foods. And if you look at the ingredient list, the first ingredient is just plain old cauliflower, no almond flour, rice flour, all the other additives I talked about. And because of this, if you look at the carbs, it's only 3 grams of carbs per serving. That's almost nothing. And this makes for a very diabetic-friendly way to have pizza. All right, next let's talk about fries. So this is another terrible diabetic food. It's full of carbs, full of fat, but there's ways to improve upon this otherwise delicious snack. So some people have tried low-carb French fry recipes using rutabaga, parsnips, other questionable alternatives. I've tried these. They just don't taste like fries. They're not very good. And in my opinion, just not worth the time. So what I've come up with is a few ways you can take good old French fries made with potatoes and make them lower in glycemic index and cause them to cause less of an impact on your blood sugar. So the first thing you want to do when you're making French fries is choosing the right type of potato. This is something that not a lot of people are aware of, but there's different varieties of potatoes that are very high in glycemic index. Certain potatoes like Desiree potato has a GI score of 101. And then there's potatoes like the Charisma and the Nicola potatoes. They have a much lower GI score of 53 and 59 respectively. So they'll have a much lower impact on your blood sugars. So it's as simple as picking the right type of potato to make your fries that alone can have such a big impact on the blood sugars and cause the blood sugars not to rise as high. The second thing is something else that's really interesting that I think not a lot of people are aware of, but if you add vinegar to your fries, whether you toss them in some vinegar before, you dip them in some vinegar, make like an oil and vinegar mix, it actually lowers the glycemic index, causes less of a blood sugar spike. So the addition of vinegar to potatoes actually helps slow digestion and it decreases the rise in blood sugar levels. And this has actually been proved in multiple studies. So this is another interesting way to cause those fries to have less of an impact on your blood sugars. And then one final tip for making French fries a little bit more diabetic friendly. Turns out that if you cook your potatoes, you boil them first, and then you put them in a refrigerator to let them cool down before you throw them in the air fryer, before you go ahead and fry them, it actually lowers the glycemic index and causes an increase in something called resistant starch in the potatoes. Resistant starch is similar to fiber as it's unable to be digested by the body, and therefore the less carbs that are going to be digested from the potatoes that you make, the less the blood sugar is going to spike. So remember, before you cook your fries, let them cool down in the refrigerator first, and this alone is going to cause the glycemic index to drop in the fries that you make and cause a lower impact on the blood sugar. And one other tip I have for you, this is something that I personally like to do, may not be something everybody would be into, but I actually sprinkle a little bit of chia seeds on my fries. It adds fiber to the fries, which lowers the blood sugar spike. They generally don't have any taste. They add a little bit of crunch to the fries, and I just find it's another easy way to kind of lower that glycemic index of the French fries. So remember, for a diabetic friendly French fry, make sure you're using the right type of potato, make sure you're adding a little bit of vinegar to them, make sure you're cooling them before cooking, and then if you're adventurous like me, add a little bit of chia seeds to them as well. So one last one that I wanted to go over is potato chips. So this is another one that is not a diabetic friendly food. They have a lot of carbs, a lot of fat, and generally they cause a pretty significant blood sugar spike. But I have two diabetic friendly alternatives that I've used over the years that I found has a very minimal impact on my blood sugar and gives me that satisfaction the same way a potato chip does. So the first one is a personal favorite of mine. They only have about 1 to 2 grams of carbs per the entire bag, which is almost nothing, will cause very little impact on the blood sugar. And it's by a company called Wisps. So they come in a variety of flavors that you're going to be familiar with, as most chips have similar flavors. Cheddar, nacho, barbecue. They crunch like a chip. They're a good alternative. They satisfy my craving for chips without the guilt that's associated with the blood sugar spikes that's caused from all the carbs in regular potato chips. Another chip alternative that I found has a very minimal impact on my blood sugar when I'm craving potato chips is by a company called Quest Chips. So they have a number of different flavors. My favorite is actually nacho cheese because it tastes very similar to Doritos. And in each bag, they're only coming in at about 4 grams of net carbs. They have a ton of protein, which actually helps to slow digestion and may also decrease your blood sugar spike. So those are my two favorite alternatives for potato chips. Both of those are going to have very little impact on the blood sugars. And overall, those are my 5 favorite diabetic-friendly alternatives for 5 popular foods. Please let me know in the comments if you have any suggestions, any other diabetic-friendly alternatives you've used yourself over the years. I'd love to hear about that. And thank you so much for watching the video.